At the beginning of the COVID pandemic, obviously there was a huge interest to know whether maybe this disease was being caused or was caused by climate change. So we decided to investigate this, and very early we realized that we were not going to get enough access to the data that was required to answer that question. But while we were doing that search, we found many case examples, in fact, over 20 different case examples that allows to justify climate change, regardless of whether climate change caused COVID or not. We had at least 20 different ways that we can explain COVID. Let me just give you an example. You think about the craziness of COVID, all of the people around the world that died, the people that got sick, the economic loss of COVID. You think about all of that nightmare, and all of that nightmare goes to a single instant between a person and a wild animal infected with that virus. That event is called an spillover, right? So that event, it turns out that it might look very insignificant, but it was the thing that what pulled the trigger that made COVID such a big problem. At that moment, climate change had many different ways that could have caused that spillover. So imagine a bat in the middle of the jungle somewhere. This animal is right there with all of the pathogens, and we are here living nicely. We had no conflict with them. We go there with climate change. Basically, we're talking about droughts now that force those animals to travel farther away in their search for food. You can think about also wildfires, which now are being aggravated by the drought, the heat, and now this bat loses their habitat. What do you think that animal is gonna do? It's gonna start traveling farther away, coming upon contact, and then increasing the chances that we generate that first spillover. We generated a question, and the question is really how many diseases can be affected by climate change. So what we did, we took every single disease that is registered almost since the end of the Roman Empire until now. Lucky for us, somebody collected that data already. So there is a very nice list of diseases. What we did was to take every single one of diseases and see in the scientific literature where it has been affected by every one of 10 different climatic changes. When you do that systematically, looking just for case examples, places around the world, we found over 3,000 case examples. And those 3,000 case examples can be clustered in 4 different ways in which climate change has impacted humanity. So the first one was, so here is the pathogen, and this is you. The first one is climate change forcing many of these pathogens to move. As a result, they come upon contact with us. And in that case, you had hundreds of examples. We just explained the case example with the bat. The other mechanism that we've encountered was climate change forcing us to move. So now it's you can think about a wildfire, everybody has to run away. You can think about a flood, a hurricane, everybody gotta move. And in that movement, we are now the ones that encroach into the habitat of the animal, of the pathogens, then creating that spillover. The third mechanism was actually climate change making many of these pathogens worse. So just to give you an example, when you think about heat waves reach temperatures of 40, 42 degrees. Basically, what is happening there in the wild, this is a process of natural selection in which you are selecting bacteria and viruses that can tolerate that kind of heat. So when a pathogen like that goes and infects a human being, we don't have mechanism to deal with that thing, because fever just cannot do anything to the virus or to the bacteria because they're already adapted to survive temperatures that hot. And the last mechanism was climate change making us weaker. And we encountered many examples on this, and this actually happens many different ways. You can think about a hurricane or a flood disrupting access of people to health care, such that if they get sick, they just don't have a doctor or medicine or anything for them to get prevented. So that actually reduces the extent to which we can cope with these pathogens once we get infected. Once we compile the entire list of diseases that we know had impacted humanity and look for scientific papers that had shown that climatic change affecting that disease, we encountered that of all of the diseases that had ever impacted humanity, that there is a record of, 58% of those diseases have been affected at some point by those climatic changes. What that reveals to me is the magnitude of the vulnerability that we are under. The analogy that I like to use, imagine that I get in a fight with Mike Tyson. I don't know, I think I'm strong enough to get in a fight with Mike Tyson and maybe punch him once or twice and he's gonna kick my butt. Now, putting the same analogy, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, and Jackie Chan, and now you have all of those guys fighting against me. There is no way I'm going to be surviving those 4 guys. I can barely survive one. What a chance I'm going to survive the 4. As it comes down to climate change, what we are talking about here is over 200 diseases that can be made worse by climate change, all of them coming and attacking us in over 1,000 different ways. So for me, one of the obvious conclusions of this paper is that there is no way we're going to be able to adapt to climate change. Add to this recipe the adaptation that we will need to cope with the heat, the adaptation for the floods, the adaptation for the wildfires, the adaptation for the hurricanes, and you realize how overwhelming is going to become climate change and the amount of suffering that that's going to create upon us if we don't deal with this problem seriously and acting right now.